Hello and welcome back to the Balance Training and Coaching channel. Today's video is on how to agree SMART goals, and this video was requested by someone called Billy who works at company R, and Billy was asking, can you just give me some pointers on how to agree SMART goals? And Billy specifically asked for 5, and so here they are, Billy. 5 things that you could play around with when it comes to setting SMART goals. And of course, if you need more clarification or you want me to send handouts, let me know and I'll happily get them to you. Otherwise, let's get started. Okay, so the first point I want to offer is titled The Truth About SMART. Now, I do a lot of people management training, as I think you know, Billy, and I always do a module on goal setting. Really short, just 30 minutes, because I find that people tend to not need very much assistance at all with setting goals. That said, SMART is probably the most prolific model out there for setting goals, and used skillfully, it's really good. Of course, that's why it still exists. That said, I want to add something to it. And what I want to add to it is this, which is I often on the courses start by asking people to raise their hand if they know of SMART, and usually I get a few hands. The next thing I do is then I ask people to keep their hand raised if they'd like to volunteer for something, and then I pick a volunteer. And when I've got the volunteer, I then ask everyone else not to help them when I ask that volunteer to tell me, what does the S stand for in SMART? Okay, what does the M stand for? And so on, right through to T. Now, interestingly, point number 1 is most people can't remember what the acronym stands for. And this is a bit of a problem because point 1, as I say, is people can't remember what it stands for. And point 2 is that often people are confused about the difference between A for achievable and R for realistic. If indeed those terms are used for those letters, they do change. So that's point number 1. Point number 2 is in terms of the following. Information processing. This assumes on one level that everyone processes information in the same way, and of course that's not the case. Different people process information in different ways, and therefore one of the things I sometimes do is when I'm working with a group of people, I'll get them to stand on a spectrum from generic at that end to detailed at that end. And it's not either or, it's graded, so 10, 20, 30, 40, 50%, all the way up to 100% that way, and the same that direction. And one of the questions I ask is, generally speaking, when you process information, are you more of a generic or more of a detailed person? And if so, to what degree? This is about preferences, okay? Obviously, at some point, we're all both, but the point is, what's your general preference? Now, what you tend to find is that you have to be careful if you try using all of SMART on a generic, as I call it, and typically that's someone who's moderately to majorly generic, as in broad. You've got to be very careful of those people, because generally speaking, those people want something quick, clear, simple and succinct. And sometimes if you try and run a SMART goal through with a generic of that nature, you can lose them. By the time you get to A, they're gone. It's too much detail for them. Likewise, sometimes, not always, be very careful about major to extreme detailed people. Sometimes it can take them an hour and a half just to set one SMART goal, because they need to go into all the detail, get all the facts, structure the whole thing, have a comprehensive coverage and so on. So you can actually cause people's brain to implode sometimes if you're not aware of how they process information. Therefore, what can we do? Well, it's a bit like saying, at the very least, the goal should be specific. You should be able to measure it. Otherwise, of course, how do we know if we've achieved it or not? And it should be timed because, of course, we need to have a deadline, really. And therefore, it's a bit like saying, if you don't use SMART, at the very least, use SMUT. Okay, so point number 2, yes. Point number 2 I call Q versus Q. And it starts with the first Q, which is the quantifiable goal. So some goals are quantifiable. Quantity, number, goals that have numbers in, whether it's time or money or dates and so on. So for example, let's say timekeeping. I'm either in at 9:30 or I'm not. It's quite easy to measure. I either made 10 books or I didn't. Again, it's quite easy to measure in that sense. Where you have to be very careful when it comes to setting goals is with the second Q. You need to be very careful about qualitative goals, which is actually fiendishly difficult to say as well. Qualitative goals don't necessarily have numbers in them. Invariably they don't. So for example, as my manager, you might say, okay Kurt, next year I want you to increase your confidence just right across the board with the work. Alright, how are we going to measure that? Or, Kurt, I need you to become a really strong team player next year. Okay, how are we going to measure that? And so on. And you'll notice quite quickly actually that these creep in all over the place. You need to be a better communicator. You need to demonstrate leadership. Okay, how are we going to measure these things? And you'll find that they can be very difficult to measure. And as a consequence, Billy, if you want to, let me know and I'll send you a handout. It's a couple of pages and I've written down half a dozen ways to measure qualitative goals. Okay? Keep an eye on those, they're fiendish to achieve.